The thing you need to understand about my grandmother is that she was the center of everything, not in the way people say about matriarchs at funerals, not symbolic, not honorary. I mean, she was the actual gravitational center of a family of 31 people across 4 generations, and she operated from a 3-bedroom house on Delancey Street in South Philadelphia that she'd lived in since 1971. She cooked for everyone. She arbitrated every dispute. She managed the money when someone couldn't manage their own. When my cousin Marcus got arrested at 17, it was her house he came back to. When my Aunt Denise left her second husband, she slept in the back bedroom for 11 months. My mother called her every single morning at 6:45 without exception. My Uncle Terence, who lived in Delaware, drove down every Sunday. Not most Sundays, every Sunday. I tell you this so you understand that what happened wasn't something I could walk away from. It wasn't an isolated haunting in a place I could sell or leave. It was woven into the daily life of everyone I loved, and my grandmother was the one who wove it, and she did it with rules that I broke. I was the one who opened the window. And I was the one who saw what happened to my cousin Jada. Because of it, and I need to tell someone because it's been 4 years. And I still don't understand what I did, but I know what it cost her. My grandmother's house was a narrow row house. Brick front, flat roof, the kind where the back of the house faces a concrete alley, and then the backs of the houses on the next street over. 3 floors if you count the finished basement where my uncle used to sleep. The main floor had the living room in front, then a dining room, then the kitchen, and the kitchen had 1 window above the sink that faced the alley. That was the back window. It was a normal window. Double hung, painted wood frame, the glass slightly warped in the way old glass gets. My grandmother kept a small shelf across the bottom sill with ceramic saints on it. San Martin de Porres, the Virgin of Guadalupe, St. Michael. They weren't decorative. They were positioned deliberately, facing out, and I learned young not to move them. The rule about the window was simple, stated without explanation and enforced with a ferocity that seemed outsized for such a small thing. After midnight, the back window stays closed. Not just closed, latched with the ceramic saints in position and the small curtain drawn. My grandmother would check it herself every night before she went to bed, which was usually around 11:30. If you were still up watching television in the living room, or studying at the dining room table, or eating leftover rice at the kitchen counter, she would walk past you, go to the window, confirm the latch, adjust the saints if necessary, and pull the curtain over. She wouldn't say anything, she'd just do it, the way you check that a stove is off. When I was a child, I assumed this was just one of her things. She had many things. Don't whistle indoors after dark. Don't put shoes on the table. Don't answer the door if no one knocked but you heard footsteps. Don't leave mirrors uncovered in a room where someone is sleeping. Caribbean grandmother things, my mother called them. Though my grandmother was from North Philadelphia and had never been to the Caribbean. My mother's dismissal was gentle. She loved her mother, respected her completely, but drew a line at the supernatural. She called it Mama's folklore and let it be. I'm telling you this because the rule didn't seem important. It seemed like superstition in a house full of superstitions, and I grew up navigating all of them without asking why. The same way you learn to step over a crack in the sidewalk when you're 5 and never fully stop doing it even though you know it means nothing. I was 26 when it mattered. I'd moved back into my grandmother's house after a lease fell through. My roommate had gotten married suddenly, and I couldn't cover the full rent on what I made doing HVAC installs. My grandmother offered me the back bedroom on the second floor. No rent, just help with groceries and drive her to church on Sundays and her doctor on Wednesdays. It was a good deal, and I took it without hesitation. Half my cousins had done the same thing at various points. The house was a way station. People flowed through it. At the time I moved back in, 3 of us were living there besides my grandmother. Me in the back bedroom. My cousin Jada in the front bedroom on the same floor. She was 22, finishing her last year at Temple, commuting by bus. And my Uncle Terrence's son, Derek, in the basement, though he was only there on weekends because he worked construction in Jersey during the week. The house was full in the way my grandmother's house was always full, not just the residents. People came through constantly. My Aunt Denise every afternoon to sit with my grandmother and watch her shows. My mother in the evenings 3 times a week. Cousins dropping off kids, picking up Tupperware, borrowing the car. Sunday dinners that could seat 14 if you opened the folding table in the living room. The house breathed with people. It was never quiet for long, except at night. At night, after everyone left and my grandmother went to bed, the house got very still in the way that old row houses do, the walls thick enough to muffle the street, the alley silent, the pipes ticking as they cooled. I'd stay up late most nights, either watching something on my laptop in my room or sitting in the kitchen eating cereal and scrolling my phone. The kitchen at night was peaceful. Yellow light from the overhead fixture, the hum of the ancient refrigerator, the occasional car passing in the alley. I liked it there, and the window was always latched, always curtained. I never thought about it because I'd never had a reason to open it in the first place. The kitchen wasn't hot. There was a small AC unit in the living room window that kept the main floor tolerable in summer, and in winter the radiators clanked efficiently enough. The back window served no function except to let in daylight while my grandmother washed dishes. I had no reason to touch it. The night I opened it was July 14th. I know the exact date because of what happened after. It was the hottest week of that summer. The city had issued an excessive heat warning 3 days running, and the AC unit in the living room had died the previous afternoon. My Uncle Terrence said he'd bring a new one Sunday, but that was 4 days away. The house was sweltering. My grandmother's bedroom had a small fan that she aimed at her face, and she seemed unbothered. She'd grown up without air conditioning and considered it optional, but the rest of us were miserable. Jada and I had spent the evening sitting on the front stoop with glasses of ice water, but even outside the air was thick and motionless. By midnight, she'd gone up to her room with a wet towel around her neck, and I was in the kitchen with my shirt off, standing in front of the open freezer door every few minutes. The thermometer on the wall. My grandmother kept one of those old mercury ones near the back door, read 94 degrees inside the house. I looked at the window. The curtain was drawn. The saints were in place. The latch was fastened. And behind all of that was an alley where there might be a breeze, or at least air, that hadn't been sitting inside brick walls all day, recycling itself into something unbreathable. I want to be clear about my reasoning because I've replayed it many times. I did not think I'm going to break my grandmother's rule. I thought, it's a window, and it's 94 degrees, and I'm a grown man, and there is no reason not to open it. The rule existed in the same category as not whistling indoors, or not putting shoes on the table. An old habit, a cultural residue, something I respected in her presence, but didn't genuinely believe had weight. My mother's framing had done its work, Mama's folklore. I had inherited her gentle dismissal. I moved the saints carefully. Set them on the counter to the left of the sink, still in order, still facing the same direction. I unlatched the window. I pulled the curtain aside and pushed the lower sash up. The air that came in was cooler. Not by much, maybe a few degrees, but it moved, and the movement was everything. I stood there with my palms on the sill and my face near the gap and breathed. The alley was dark. The houses on the opposite side were all unlit. Backs of buildings, no porches, just flat walls with occasional windows, most of them curtained or boarded. A single streetlight at the far end of the alley cast a pale orange cone that didn't reach our section. I could hear a distant siren, a dog somewhere, the low thump of a bass line from a car several blocks away. I stood there for maybe 3 minutes. Then I got a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table with my phone, and let the air come in. I remember feeling pleased with myself, such a small defiance and so reasonable. No thunder, no omen, just slightly cooler air on my bare shoulders. I sat there for probably another 20 minutes reading articles on my phone. At some point, I glanced up and noticed the curtain wasn't moving. The air had gone still again. I thought about closing the window, and then I thought, leave it. Let it cool the house overnight. Close it before Grandma wakes up. She rose at 6 of every morning without variation. I could set an alarm for 5:30, come down, close and latch the window, replace the saints, draw the curtain. She'd never know. I went to bed at about 12:40, left the window open, slept badly. It was still hot and my room on the second floor held heat like a kiln. My phone alarm woke me at 5:30, and I went downstairs in my shorts, groggy and irritable, and closed the window. Put the saints back, drew the curtain, relatched, everything in place. My grandmother came down at 6, as always, made her coffee, stood at the sink washing her cup from the night before. She didn't look at the window differently. She didn't say anything. I sat at the table and drank coffee with her, and we talked about whether Terrence would really bring the AC unit on Sunday or forget like he'd forgotten the shelving last month. Normal. Fine. Nothing happened that day. Nothing happened the next night either. I opened the window again at 12:15 after my grandmother went to bed, sat in the kitchen for 20 minutes, enjoying what marginal airflow there was, then went upstairs and slept. Closed it at 5:30 again. No incident, no discovery. The third night is when I noticed. I opened the window at midnight. I'd stopped even hesitating and sat at the table with a bowl of cereal. It was maybe 12:20 when I heard what I thought was a cat in the alley. A soft sound, rhythmic like a low, repeated vocalization. Not a meow, more like a hum. A single sustained note that would stop, pause for exactly the same interval and resume. I didn't get up to look. I wasn't frightened. I assumed it was an animal, or possibly a person, maybe someone drunk or on the phone, their voice carrying strangely in the still air. Over. The sound continued for several minutes and then stopped. I finished my cereal, rinsed the bowl, and went to bed, left the window open. In the morning, I closed it as usual. Over. My grandmother said nothing, but at breakfast she looked at me in a way that I noticed but couldn't categorize. A long, steady look while I was talking about my work schedule for the week. Over. Not suspicious, not angry, almost appraising, like she was checking whether something had changed. The fourth night, the sound was back. Same time, approximately 12:20. Over. Same quality, a low hum, rhythmic, with metronomic pauses, but closer, I was sure of that. The previous night it had seemed to come from the far end of the alley, near the streetlight. Now it sounded like it was directly across from our house, maybe 30 feet away. I went to the window. I'm not a fearful person. I work in crawl spaces and unlit basements for a living. I've pulled dead animals out of ductwork. I looked out into the alley and saw nothing. The darkness was complete in our section. I could see the orange cone of the streetlight at the far end, and between me and that light, nothing moved. But the sound was there, closer than the streetlight, or closer than the houses across the alley. While I stood there, it stopped. Clean silence. I waited, and it did not resume. After a minute, I went back to the table, sat with my phone for another 10 minutes, and then went to bed. I left the window open. I don't know why. I think I was telling myself it was nothing. A stray cat, a pipe, some mechanical artifact of the heat. Over. I think I was also telling myself that if I closed it now, I was admitting my grandmother's rule had weight, and I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to be the kind of person who closes windows because of sounds in alleys. The fifth night, I didn't hear the sound. I opened the window, sat for half an hour, heard nothing, went to bed. Relief, confirmation that it was random. The sixth night, nothing. Over. The AC arrived on Sunday as promised, and I stopped opening the window. Problem solved. No more heat, no more reason to break the rule. Over. But on Monday night, the window closed, the AC running, the house cool. I heard the sound from my bedroom on the second floor, faint, barely perceptible under the rattle of the AC unit in the living room below, but unmistakable, the same hum, the same rhythm, the same metronomic pause. My bedroom window faced the alley too. I did not get up. I lay in bed and listened and told myself it was a pipe. It was the AC cycling. It was the refrigerator compressor doing something new. The sound lasted approximately 4 minutes and then stopped. I checked my phone, 12:22, Tuesday night, 12:20. The same sound, slightly louder, still from outside, still from the alley direction. I got up this time and went to my window, which was closed, had always been closed per the rule, and looked down into the alley. The street light at the far end lit a narrow corridor of orange. In that light, at the very edge of it, I saw a person standing. They were facing our house. I could tell by the orientation of their body, squared toward me, shoulders parallel to our back wall. They were too far away for me to see features. Just a shape, a person-shaped darkness at the edge of the light. The humming stopped as I watched. The person didn't move. I stood at my window for several minutes, and they remained perfectly still, facing our house. Then I went back to bed and did not look again. The sound did not resume. I want to tell you that I was frightened at this point, but that's not exactly right. I was unsettled. I was aware that something was tracking in an unusual direction. But the rational framework was still holding. A person in an alley is just a person in an alley. Philadelphia has plenty of people who stand in alleys at midnight. Addicts, homeless individuals, people on their phones, people smoking, people waiting for someone. There was nothing inherently supernatural about a figure at the edge of a streetlight. The humming was unusual but not impossible. People hum. What I could not explain was the timing, the consistency. 12, 22, 12, 20. The same duration, the same pause rhythm. The same cessation pattern. It would stop and then nothing. As if it were a scheduled broadcast and not a human behavior. Wednesday night I did not stay up. I took a Benadryl at 10 nuck and was asleep before midnight. I don't know if the sound occurred. Thursday, I worked late and didn't get home until 1:30. My grandmother was long asleep. The house was dark and cool and silent. I went straight to bed, no sound. Friday night, Jada was in the kitchen when I came down at 11 for water. She was studying at the table, summer classes, something for her degree, with her laptop open and a legal pad full of notes. We talked for a few minutes. I asked how classes were going. She said, fine, stressed about an exam. Normal cousin conversation. I got my water and went back upstairs. At 12:15, I heard her chair scrape the kitchen floor. Sound travels clearly in that house, especially at night. I heard her footsteps, heard the refrigerator open and close. Then silence for a while. Then at what I later confirmed was approximately 12:20. I heard the back window open. I sat up in bed. The sound was unmistakable. The wooden sash sliding up, that particular shutter and stick of old painted wood. I should have gone downstairs immediately. I should have said something. But I hesitated, because what would I say? Close that window. Why? Because Grandma said so. Because I heard humming. I'd opened it myself for 4 nights running, and nothing had happened to me. Nothing visible, nothing tangible. I had no evidence that opening the window was dangerous. I had a rule I'd already broken and a sound I couldn't explain. That wasn't enough to go downstairs and tell my adult cousin to close a window at midnight. So I listened. I heard nothing for several minutes. Then I heard Jada's chair move again. She was sitting back down. She was just cooling the kitchen. Same thing I'd done. Same reasoning, same heat, same rational adult decision. The AC was in the living room. The kitchen still got warm with the oven's residual heat and the overhead light. I don't know if she heard the humming that night. I fell asleep before she came upstairs. In the morning, the window was closed and the saints were in place and the curtain was drawn, which means she'd put everything back, which means she knew the rule and had followed the same logic I had. Open it late, close it early. Grandma never knows. I didn't ask her about it. I don't know why. Some reluctance to acknowledge what I'd been doing, maybe. Some sense that bringing it up would make it into something, and I didn't want it to be something. Saturday night, my grandmother stayed up later than usual. One of her shows had a special episode running until midnight, and she watched it in the living room with a cup of tea. I was upstairs in my room. Jada was out with friends. Derek was in Jersey. At 12:10, I heard my grandmother turn off the television, and I heard her footsteps go to the kitchen. I heard her check the window, the familiar small sounds of her hands on the latch, The ceramic click of her adjusting a saint, then her footsteps going to her bedroom, her door closing. At 12:20, I heard the humming from outside, from the alley, louder than before, loud enough that it was clearly audible from my second-floor bedroom with my window closed and the AC running. A sustained low note with rhythmic pauses, like breathing, if breathing were musical, like a single held chord from a throat that didn't need to inhale. It lasted longer this time, maybe 10 minutes. I lay in bed and listened and did not go to the window and did not look. When it stopped, the silence felt deliberate, like the silence after someone stops speaking and is waiting for a response. Sunday was a full house day. Terrence and his wife, my mother, Aunt Denise, 3 of my younger cousins, Derek up from the basement looking hungover. My grandmother cooked enough food for an army, and we filled the dining room and the living room and the front stoop. I watched my grandmother move through the crowd of her family, serving, correcting, laughing, telling my youngest cousin to get his feet off the furniture. And I thought about asking her, about the window, about the rule, about what was in the alley. I didn't ask. I think I was afraid that asking would mean admitting what I'd done, and I wasn't ready for her reaction. My grandmother's anger was rare and devastating. Not loud, not violent, but absolute. She could look at you in a way that made you feel you damaged something irreparable. I'd seen it directed at others, and I never wanted it directed at me. But I watched her that day, looking for something. Some sign of awareness that things had shifted. She seemed the same. She served food and told stories and fussed over everyone equally. The only thing I noticed, and I might have imagined this, was that she spent more time near Jada than usual. Not hovering, just proximate, sitting next to her on the couch, touching her shoulder as she passed. Asking about her classes with a specificity that suggested she'd been thinking about Jada's schedule more than normal. By the following week, Jada had started acting differently. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone else seemed to notice, but I was watching. I was watching because of the window, and the sound and the figure in the alley, and because I knew she'd opened the window too, and because I was beginning to feel the shape of something I'd put into motion. The first thing I noticed was her sleep. She'd always been a morning person. Up at 7 for her commute to Temple, out the door by 7:30, organized and energetic in a way that made me feel like a mess by comparison. But that week she started sleeping later, 7:30, then 8 plife. Hear her alarm go off and then go off again. Snoozed. She missed her first bus twice and had to take a later one. Small things. Then her eating changed. Not that she stopped eating. She'd come to the kitchen at odd hours, 2 in the afternoon, 11 at night, and stand at the counter eating plain rice from the pot with a spoon, not bothering to heat it, not sitting down. She'd eat mechanically, looking at nothing, chewing slowly. When I asked if she was okay, she said she was tired. School was stressful. The heat was bad. All plausible, all reasonable. But her eyes were wrong. I don't know how to describe this without sounding like I'm inventing something in retrospect. Her eyes looked the same color, same shape, but the way she used them had changed. She looked at things longer than she needed to. She'd be looking at her phone and her gaze would drift off the screen and fix on a point in the middle distance for 10-15 seconds before she'd blink and return. She'd look at people, at me, at my grandmother, at whoever was in the room, with a steadiness that felt evaluative, like she was measuring something about us. I told myself she was stressed. Exam pressure, summer heat, the fatigue of finishing a degree while living in your grandmother's house in your 20s. I told myself this because the alternative was that something had come through the window I'd opened, and that something had touched her more than it had touched me, and that I was responsible. The humming continued every night, 12:20. I stopped checking. I knew it was there. I knew it would stop after 10 or 15 minutes. I knew that it was slightly louder each night, or that the source of it was slightly closer. I knew these things, and I did nothing because I didn't know what doing something would look like. On Thursday of that week, 11 days after I'd first opened the window, I came home from work, and Jada was sitting in the kitchen with my grandmother. The kitchen light was off. They were sitting in the near dark, illuminated only by the light from the dining room that spilled through the doorway. My grandmother was holding both of Jada's hands across the table and speaking to her, very quietly in a tone I couldn't hear clearly from the hallway. I caught fragments. You don't answer, and it doesn't know you, and this is not yours to hold. I stepped back into the hallway and waited. I felt sick. Not physically, a different kind of sick, the kind that lives in your chest and is made of complicity. My grandmother knew. She knew something was wrong with Jada, and she was addressing it in her way, with her language, in her framework, and I was standing in the hallway knowing I was the reason. After a few minutes, I heard chairs move, and my grandmother came through the dining room toward the hallway. She saw me and stopped. The light from the living room was behind me, and the light from the dining room was behind her, and we were both in shadow, and she looked at me, and I knew that she knew. She didn't say anything. She walked past me, close enough that her shoulder nearly brushed mine, and she went to the living room and turned on the television and sat down. I stood there for a long time. Then I went to the kitchen, where Jada was still sitting at the table in the dim light, and I asked her how she was doing. She looked at me with that new steadiness. "Fine," she said. "Tired. You seem different lately," I said. "Different how?" I didn't know how to answer that. I said, "Just tired, I guess. Make sure you're sleeping enough." She nodded. Her eyes didn't leave my face. After a few seconds, she said, "Do you hear it at night? The sound outside?" My throat closed. "What sound? You know what sound?" She wasn't accusing. Her voice was flat, observational. "The hum in the alley, every night at the same time. You've heard it, I know you have." I sat down across from her, the chair my grandmother had just been in. "How long have you been hearing it?" "Since I opened the window," she said it simply. No guilt, no confession. A statement of sequence. I don't know why I opened it. I don't even remember deciding to. I was studying, and then the window was open, and I don't remember getting up. She paused. "But that's not the part that bothers me." "What bothers you?" She looked at the window. The curtain was drawn. The saints were in place. Everything was correct. "It knows my name," she said, "not the sound, not the humming, something else. After the humming stops, there's a voice and it uses my name, and it says things that are true about me. Things I haven't told anyone." I stared at her. "Jada." "I'm not scared," she said, and that's what scared me. The absence of fear in her voice. the way she said it like she was reporting weather. I think maybe I should be, but I'm not. It feels like, I don't know, it feels like being recognized. Like someone finally sees me accurately. I opened my mouth and what came out was, I opened the window first, before you. I'm the one who... I know, she said. I figured. She looked back at me. It doesn't matter who opened it. It's open now. Even when it's closed, it's open now. You can feel that, right? The latch doesn't mean anything anymore. I couldn't feel that. I couldn't feel anything except the nausea of responsibility and the growing certainty that I'd done something to my cousin that I couldn't undo by closing a window or replacing ceramic saints. Whatever had been out there, whatever the rule was keeping at a distance, I'd invited it closer, and it had chosen her. That night, I went to my grandmother. I found her in her bedroom at 10 like A, sitting in her chair by the small fan reading her Bible. She looked up when I knocked on the open door, and her face was already set in an expression I hadn't seen before, not anger, something worse than anger, something tired and old and grieving. Sit down, she said. I sat on the edge of her bed. The room smelled like her, lavender lotion and coffee and the particular warmth of a room that one person has slept in for 50 years. How long, she said. 2 weeks ago the heat wave, the AC was broken. How many nights? 4. I opened it 4 nights and then I stopped. But Jada, I know about Jada. Silence. The fan oscillated, pushing warm air across my face. My grandmother closed her Bible and set it on the small table beside her chair. She removed her reading glasses and folded them on top of the Bible. Every movement was deliberate and unhurried. Your grandfather put that rule in this house in 1974, she said. 3 years after we moved in, he was a practical man. You know that. Everyone knows that. He didn't believe in anything he couldn't see working. But he put that rule and he put the saints and he told me, after midnight the back window stays closed. He didn't explain. I didn't ask. I trusted him. She looked at me. I maintained it for 50 years, and not once did I open that window after midnight, not in summer, not when the heat was worse than this. Not when your mother was a baby and the house was an oven and I thought we'd all suffocate. I didn't open it because your grandfather said don't, and I trusted that he had a reason. Grandma, I'm sorry. I'm not finished. Her voice was quiet, but it stopped me like a wall. I maintained it, and I asked everyone who lived in this house to maintain it. And most of you did because you love me, and you respected the rule even if you thought it was nonsense. And that was enough. For 50 years that was enough. What's in the alley? I asked. She shook her head. That's not the right question. The right question is, what does the window mean when it's open? Not what's outside. What does an open window mean at that hour? In this house, to whatever is out there. Your grandfather understood that. He understood that some things aren't about locks and walls. They're about signals. About what you're saying without knowing you're saying it. What does it mean? It means welcome. She said the word like it tasted wrong. An open window after midnight in this house means welcome. It means come closer. Whoever you are, you're acknowledged. You're invited to be closer. But I didn't mean, it doesn't matter what you meant. You said it. The window said it for you. And now something is closer that was far away before. And it's not going to get farther because you closed the window. Closing the window now is like closing your mouth after you've already said the words. The words are out. I felt the full weight of it then. Not fear, something worse than fear. The understanding that I'd done something through carelessness that couldn't be undone through care, that my rational dismissal of a rule I didn't understand had cost something I couldn't pay back. What's happening to Jada? I asked. My grandmother was quiet for a long time. The fan oscillated. A car passed in the street outside, its headlights sweeping briefly across the wall. It's talking to her, she finally said. It chose her, not you. I don't know why. Maybe because she's younger. Maybe because she's more open, more lonely in a way she doesn't show. I don't know how it works. I never wanted to know how it works. I just wanted to keep it far enough away that it couldn't choose anyone. What does it want? I don't know what it wants. I know what it does. Your grandfather told me once, just once, the only time he talked about it, he said, it learns the shape of a person and then it fills that shape from the inside. I asked what that meant, and he said he didn't know entirely, but he'd seen it happen to someone when he was young, someone in the neighborhood, and afterward the person was still there, but they weren't the same thing inside the same shape. I thought of Jada's eyes, the steadiness, the evaluation of her, the way she'd said it feels like being recognized with no fear. How do we stop it? I asked. My grandmother looked at me with an expression I will never forget. It was pity, not for herself, for me, because I still thought this was a problem with a solution, and she knew it wasn't. We don't stop it, she said. We maintain, we hold the line, we keep the window closed, the real window, and the other one. The one inside Jada that's open now, we stay close to her. We keep her in this house surrounded by family. We don't let her be alone, especially at night. We don't let her go to the window. We don't let her go to the alley. We make the family around her into a wall that's stronger than what's trying to get in. For how long? For as long as it takes. Forever, if necessary. That's what this family is for. I started to understand then what my grandmother meant by family, not the sentimental version, not togetherness as warmth, family as infrastructure, family as containment protocol, the Sunday dinners, the constant presence, the phone calls, the obligations, all of it was structural. All of it served a purpose beyond love. My grandmother had built a system in which no one in her house was ever truly alone, never truly isolated, never out of sight, long enough for something to fill them without anyone noticing. And I had undermined it with a window. The next weeks were the worst of my life, not because of what I saw. I'll get to what I saw, but because of the performance. My grandmother mobilized the family without telling anyone why. She told my mother that Jada was struggling with school stress and needed support. She told Aunt Denise that Jada seemed depressed and would benefit from company. She told my Uncle Terrence to make sure Derek came home on weeknights too, to fill the house. She created reasons for people to be present. Extra dinners, a birthday that was 3 weeks away but needed early planning, a church event that required family participation, and people came. Because my grandmother asked, and when she asked, the house filled. Afternoons were crowded, evenings were loud. Someone was always in the kitchen, always in the living room, always on the stairs or in the hallway or talking through a doorway. The isolation that had allowed the window to matter The late-night solitude, the empty kitchen, the dark, quiet hours, was eliminated through sheer force of presence. Jada seemed to improve. She was pulled into conversations, dragged to family functions, given tasks, help with cooking, drive your grandmother to the pharmacy, quiz your cousin's kid on spelling words. She did these things with the competence she'd always had, and some of the flatness in her voice receded, and her eyes seemed to focus normally, and I started to think my grandmother was right. That love and proximity were enough, that you could drown out whatever was speaking to Jada by filling her hours with human noise. But at night, when even my grandmother's system couldn't prevent sleep, couldn't prevent the house from going quiet, couldn't prevent 12:20 from arriving. At night, the humming came. I heard it every night. I don't know if Jada heard it. I didn't ask. My grandmother had been clear. Don't discuss it with her. Don't acknowledge it. Don't give it weight. Pretend normality until normality reasserts itself. The saints on the windowsill, the latch secured, the curtain drawn. These were not defenses against the sound. They were defenses against acknowledgement, against the signal of welcome. The window was closed, and that meant something even if the thing outside could no longer be made distant. It meant we are not inviting. Whatever you heard before, we are not saying it now, but I couldn't sleep through it. Every night I lay in my bed and listened to that sound, closer now. So close it seemed to come from directly below my window, from the base of the house, from the wall itself. And I thought about what my grandmother had said. It learns the shape of a person, and then it fills that shape from the inside. I thought about Jada 2 rooms away, also listening. Or maybe not listening, maybe sleeping peacefully, maybe already full of something that didn't need her to be awake. 3 weeks after the window, a Thursday, I came home from work at 5:30, and the house was empty, which was unusual. My grandmother's system had ensured someone was always there, but today, nothing. My grandmother's car was gone. Jada's jacket was on the hook by the door, but the house was silent. I called out. I checked the kitchen. Empty, everything in place, the saints on the sill, the curtain drawn. I checked the living room, the dining room, my grandmother's bedroom. Empty. I went upstairs. My room empty. Jada's door was closed. I knocked. Jada? Nothing. I knocked again, louder. Jada, you home? A sound from inside, not a word, a hum, a single sustained note with a rhythmic pause, then resuming, coming from behind her door, coming from her throat. I opened the door without asking permission. Jada was sitting on her bed facing the window, her window which faced the alley, the back of the house. She was sitting cross-legged with her hands palm up on her knees, and her eyes were open, and she was humming. The same note, the same rhythm, the same metronomic pause. The sound I'd been hearing from the alley for weeks, now coming from my cousin's mouth. Her window was closed, the curtain was drawn. But she was facing it as if she could see through it, and the sound she was making was a perfect reproduction of what came from outside, and her eyes were open, but she was not seeing me. Jada. I stepped into the room. Jada, stop. She didn't stop, didn't acknowledge me. The humming continued, steady, regular, like a machine, like a signal being transmitted rather than a sound being made. I crossed the room and put my hand on her shoulder, and the humming stopped instantly. She blinked, looked at me. Her eyes were normal, focused, present, confused. What? She said. You were humming, sitting here humming with your eyes open. She frowned. I was studying. I just sat down for a second. She looked at her lap. There was no book, no laptop, no legal pad. Her hands were empty and positioned in that deliberate palm-up arrangement. She looked at them as if they belonged to someone else. How long have I been sitting here? She asked. Her voice had a quality I hadn't heard before, thin underneath the words, a thread of something that might have been fear if she'd let it be fear. I don't know. I just got home. The house. Time is it? 5:30. She looked at her phone on the bedside table, picked it up, stared at it. My last text was at 1:15, she said. I texted Monique at 1:15 about meeting up tonight. She looked at me. That's 4 hours. 4 hours sitting on a bed, facing a curtained window, humming a sound that came from something in the alley. 4 hours gone from her memory without a seam. I called my grandmother. She answered on the second ring. She was at the grocery store with Aunt Denise, would be home in 20 minutes. I said, "Come home now." She said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Just come home." She heard something in my voice and said she was on her way. When she arrived, Jada was in the kitchen drinking juice, seeming normal, seeming fine, seeming like a 22-year-old who'd accidentally napped and lost track of time. My grandmother looked at her and looked at me, and I shook my head slightly and she understood. That night, my grandmother slept in Jada's room. She didn't explain why, and Jada didn't question it. In this family, your grandmother deciding to sleep in your room wasn't strange enough to challenge. She just moved over and made space, and my grandmother brought her small pillow and her fan and lay beside her granddaughter in the twin bed, and the house settled into quiet. At 12:20, the humming came from the alley. I lay in my room and listened. It was louder than ever. It sounded like it was pressed against the house, like a face pressed to the brick, mouth open, projecting that sound directly into the wall. And from Jada's room, silence. No answering hum. My grandmother's presence was doing something, being a wall. This became the new routine. My grandmother slept in Jada's room every night. During the day, someone was always with Jada. My mother, Aunt Denise, Derek, me, someone. The system tightened around her. She went to class and came straight home. She didn't go out at night. She studied in the dining room surrounded by people, never alone, never quiet long enough for something to reach her. It was working. I could see it working. The flatness receded further. She laughed. At dinner, she complained about her professor. Normal complaints with normal irritation. She seemed like Jada again, or close enough to Jada that I could tell myself it was over, that my grandmother's method had held. But my grandmother was getting tired. I could see that too. She was 78 years old, and she was sleeping in a twin bed with a 22-year-old and waking every time Jada shifted, alert for humming, alert for movement. She wasn't resting. She was standing guard in the body of an old woman who'd been standing guard in one way or another for 50 years, and the toll was visible. She moved slower. She sat down more often. She forgot the word for something at dinner and paused with her mouth open for 3 seconds before it came to her. I told her I'd take a shift, sleep in Jada's room on alternating nights. She said no. She said it had to be her. I asked why, and she said, "Because I'm the one who knows how to stay awake inside sleep. I've been doing it my whole life." You'd fall asleep, really asleep, and that's when it would come. I didn't know what that meant. Stay awake inside sleep. I still don't know what it meant. But she said it with certainty, and I didn't argue. 5 weeks after the window, a Monday, I came home, and my grandmother was sitting at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the surface, very still, looking at the back window. Not at the curtain, at the window itself, as if she could see through the fabric. Grandma? She didn't look at me immediately. A delay of 2 seconds, long enough to notice, not long enough to be sure. Then she turned her head and smiled and said, "You're home early." "It's 5:30, I said. "Same as always." "Is it?" She looked at the clock on the wall. I thought it was earlier. That was when I felt the first real terror. Not the creeping unease of weeks prior. Genuine terror. Because my grandmother didn't lose time. My grandmother always knew what time it was, what day it was, what needed to happen next. She was the clock the rest of us set ourselves by. And she just looked at me with 2 seconds of blankness and didn't know what time it was. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the hallway between my room and Jada's, with my back against the wall and my phone in my hand. At 11:30, my grandmother came upstairs and went into Jada's room without looking at me in the hallway. At midnight, the house was quiet. At 12:15, I felt something change in the air, a pressure drop, like before a storm, except the air didn't move. It just got heavy. At 12:20, the humming started, not from outside, from inside Jada's room, not from Jada's mouth, not from any mouth, from the room itself, from the walls, from the floor, from the air between the surfaces. A vibration that was also a note, sustained and rhythmic with those metronomic pauses. But now it was inside the house. I stood up. I went to the door. I opened it. My grandmother was in the bed beside Jada. Both of them were lying still on their backs. Both of their eyes were open. Both of them were looking at the ceiling. And the sound was coming from everywhere. From the walls, from the window, from the curtain that was moving slightly, as if wind were passing through glass that was closed and latched. Neither of them was humming. The sound wasn't coming from their bodies. It was coming from the room around their bodies. The room had learned the sound. "Grandma," I said. She turned her head toward me slowly, her eyes focused on me, and I saw something in them that I had never seen in my grandmother's face before. I saw surrender, not fear, not anger. Surrender, a white flag behind the eyes of the strongest person I'd ever known. "Close the door," she whispered. "Grandma, we have to. Close the door. Go downstairs. Don't come back up until morning. I'm not leaving you. You are, because I am holding this. Over. I am holding this right now, inside this room, inside myself, and if you stay here, you give it another shape to learn. Close the door. Go." I closed the door. I went downstairs. I sat at the kitchen table, in the dark, with the curtain drawn and the saints on the sill, and I listened to the humming from above. Not loud, just present, a vibration in the bones of the house. Until sometime around 3 a.m. when it stopped. Then silence. Total, complete, empty silence, and I sat in it until dawn. In the morning, my grandmother came downstairs at 6. She made coffee. She stood at the sink. She didn't speak. When I looked at her face, I saw that she had aged. Not metaphorically, literally. She had more lines. Her eyes were deeper set. Her hands on the coffee cup had a tremor I'd never seen before. She looked like she'd spent the night holding something heavy with her body, and it had cost her months of life. Is Jada? Jada is fine. Jada is sleeping. Let her sleep today. Grandma, what happened in there? She looked at me, and for the first time I saw anger, real anger, the anger I'd spent my life trying to avoid. You opened the window, she said. That's what happened. Everything that follows is what you did. Every night I spend in that room is what you did. Every piece of myself I put between that girl and what wants her is what you did. Remember that. Carry that. I carry it. My grandmother carried it for 3 more weeks. 3 weeks of sleeping in Jada's room. 3 weeks of aging faster than she should have. 3 weeks of holding something I couldn't see, with a strength I couldn't measure, and paying for it in years she didn't have to spare. At the end of those 3 weeks, on a Tuesday evening, my grandmother told Jada to pack a bag. She was going to stay with her mother, Jada's grandmother on her father's side, in Baltimore for a while. School could wait. A semester off wouldn't kill her. Jada resisted, but my grandmother was immovable. And by Thursday morning, Jada was in a car with my uncle, Terrence, heading south on I-95. That night the humming stopped. Not gradually, not fading. It was simply absent. 12:20 came and went in silence. I lay in bed and listened to nothing. No hum, no vibration, no pressure change. The house was just a house. I went to the back window in the kitchen, drew the curtain, looked out. The alley was empty. The streetlight cast its orange cone at the far end, and nothing stood in it or near it. Nothing moved. The night was ordinary in the way nights are supposed to be ordinary. Distant traffic, a dog barking, the city existing at low volume around me. I lowered the curtain, replaced the saints, checked the latch, went to my grandmother's room. She was sitting in her chair with her Bible closed in her lap, just reading. The fan was off. The room was still. It's gone, I said. It's not gone, she said. It followed her. It will follow her wherever she goes, because the window inside her is open, and I couldn't close it. I could only hold it at a distance, and I can't do that from here. She paused. Her other grandmother will try. She knows some things, different things than me, but maybe enough. I don't know, so we just sent the problem somewhere else. My grandmother looked at me. We sent my granddaughter to the only other person I trust to stand in front of her all night. That's not sending a problem. That's admitting I can't carry it alone anymore. She looked old. She looked 10 years older than she had 6 weeks ago. She looked like a woman who had burned something essential and couldn't replenish it. Grandma, I said, I'm sorry. I know you are. What do I do? You live with it. You understand what rules mean now. You understand that not knowing why is not the same as no reason. And you maintain this house the way I've maintained it, because I won't be here forever, and someone has to keep the window closed after I'm gone. 4 years since then. My grandmother is still alive, 82, slower, smaller, but present. Still the center, still the clock, but diminished in a way the family notices without understanding. My mother says she's just aging. Aunt Denise says she needs to eat more. No one connects it to those weeks. No one knows what she spent. Jada didn't come back. She finished her degree in Baltimore, transferred to a school there. She visits for holidays. She seems fine. She seems like Jada. But she doesn't stay overnight. She comes for dinner and she leaves before dark, and no one questions it because people grow up and move away, and that's normal. I still live in the house. I still check the window every night. Saints in position, latch secure, curtain drawn. I do it at 11:30, the same time my grandmother does it, and sometimes we do it together. Both of us standing at the sink, both of us touching the latch, confirming the boundary. A ritual shared in silence. The humming has not returned, not from the alley, not from inside the house, not from anywhere. 4 years of silence. But last month Jada called me, 2 in the morning. I'm always awake at that hour now. I can't sleep through midnight anymore. She called and I picked up, and she didn't say anything for 10 seconds. I could hear her breathing. Then she said, "Do you ever hear it anymore?" I said, "No." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I hear it every night, but it's not outside anymore. It's not coming from anywhere. It's already here. It's been here for a while. I don't know when it got in, but it's in." I didn't know what to say. "I'm not scared," she said. And she said it exactly the way she'd said it 4 years ago in the kitchen. Flat, observational, without fear. I think it's almost done, whatever it's doing. I think it's almost finished learning my shape. She hung up. I called back immediately. No answer. I called 6 more times through the night. No answer. In the morning, I called her mother's house in Baltimore, and Jada answered the phone sounding sleepy and normal and said she hadn't called me. She'd been asleep since 11. Her phone showed no outgoing calls. She asked if I was okay. I said yes. I said I must have dreamed it. She said, "Get some sleep," and hung up. I went downstairs and checked the window. Saints in position, latch secure, curtain drawn. Everything in its right place. Everything maintained, the rule intact, the boundary held. But I stood there in my grandmother's kitchen, and I thought about what she'd told me that night in her bedroom, about what my grandfather had said. It learns the shape of a person, and then it fills that shape from the inside. And I thought about Jada in Baltimore saying, "I'm not scared," with no fear in her voice. And I thought about the call that she didn't make, that someone made using her voice or using her phone or using her shape. And I thought, the window is closed, the saints are in place, the rule is maintained. But Jada is the window now, and I'm the one who opened her.